Hey guys, tonight we're traveling far back, really far back to the hazy, golden baked sands of ancient Egypt. You're not a noble, not a scribe, not a tomb raider. You're something far braver, a baker's apprentice in Thebes, where the bread crunches before it ever meets your teeth. Why? Because there's sand in it. And not just by accident. Well, sometimes by accident. You stand under a barely risen sun, warm air already brushing against your cheeks like a cat that assumes you're awake. The Nile glistens in the distance, lazily oozing past the city like it's also not ready to start the day. The air smells like yeast, ash, and faintly burnt barley. Somewhere nearby, a goat screams at nothing. You adjust your lion tunic and prepare for what will be another long, dusty, and undeniably gritty day in the bakery. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you are listening from and what time it is. Always love seeing those. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the bakery. It's not really a shop like you'd find in a modern street, more like a smoky, sun-drenched mud brick structure with heat radiating from every wall. The hearth is already alive with coals. Clay domes dot the floor, ancient ovens known as taboons. Your job today? Make bread that won't kill anyone, but also might destroy a few molars. The first thing you notice, apart from the fact your sandals are already full of dust, is how much sand seems to be part of the entire process. It's not just floating in the air or clinging to the flour sacks. It's in the flour itself. Ancient Egyptians ground their grain using stone querns, basically flat rocks that required endless rubbing and grinding. Great for crushing emmer wheat. Also great for flaking off bits of sandstone right into the dough. Yum. You scoop a handful of the flour. It looks deceptively soft, like baby powder. Then you let it fall slowly through your fingers, and feel the unmistakable grit. You sigh. So this is why people in the afterlife always look so tense. Here's the deal. Emmer wheat, the main grain in ancient Egypt, is tough. Like, really tough. You can't just crush it with a whisper and a prayer. It takes effort, force, and friction. Which means grinding stones wear down and they share their erosion with your daily bread. Historians still argue whether the ancient bakers deliberately accepted the sandiness or simply couldn't do better with their tools. But there's one consensus: dental remains from the period are, well, tragic. Molars ground down like river stones. Abscesses that scream across centuries. And nobody even had floss. You glance over to your boss, let's call him Hotep, who is testing the consistency of the duff by slapping it with the back of his hand. He does this like he's checking a drum. Satisfied with the dull thump, he begins dividing the lump into little fist-sized portions. Don't forget the sand seal, he mutters. Wait, the what now? Hotep points to a flat clay stamp carved with hieroglyphs. Every official bakery uses one. You press the symbol into each round loaf to mark it with the name of the bakery, or the temple it's for, or maybe just to brag. One common motive is the ink, the symbol of life, because, well, carbs are life. These loaves aren't the fluffy, crusty baguettes of your dreams. They're dense, heavy, closer to hockey pucks than anything Instagram-worthy. And yet, they're sacred. Bread wasn't just food in ancient Egypt. It was currency, offering, and status symbol. People were paid in bread. Soldiers, laborers, even the priests running temple rituals. You didn't earn a salary. You earned loaves. You kneel to arrange the duff on a sand-covered slab. That's right, even the baking surface is coated in sand. Why? Because in an open clay oven, you need something to keep the duff from sticking, and parchment paper won't be invented for another 2,000 years. Also, the heat is inconsistent. Kind of like culinary insulation, only with chewing it. As the first batch bakes, you fan the flames with a woven palm frond. Smoke rises. Your face starts to feel like it's been basted in its own juices. Hotep hands you a finished loaf. Try it, he says. You do. It's warm, dense, slightly sour, and, yep, crunchy. Not in the artisan crust kind of way. In the was that a pebble kind of way. Your gums twitch. You smile politely. Later, you'll find that same smile on wall paintings of bakers kneading duff, loading ovens, carrying baskets full of loaves shaped like little domes, triangles, even hedgehogs. One bakery's specialty. Loaves shaped like cows. Because why not? If you're going to lose a tooth, it might as well be to something adorable. Bread wasn't just made for the living. Tombs were filled with either real or in clay. Models. The dead, after all, needed nourishment in the afterlife. But they also needed to impress Osiris. Here lies Nak, devourer of 47 loaves a week. That's for some goal. Still kneeling in the warm dirt, you glance at your hands dusted with flour and, inevitably, tiny glittering grains. Somewhere in the distance, a priest chants. Somewhere closer, a camel sneezes. And you realize, this isn't just baking. This is survival, ritual, economy, and identity. Every loaf tells a story. Even if it breaks your teeth doing it. The rooster doesn't crow. It honks like it's offended by the mere existence of morning. But that's how your day begins in Thebes. Again. You wipe the sleep from your eyes, and squint into the dimness. The stars are still out. The moon hasn't clocked out yet. But the bakery, already away. Hotep, your mentor, is ahead of you. Again. He's outside, tending the fire pit, coaxing the coals like they owe him money. The clay oven shaft-domed, soot-stained structures that look like upturned tortoise shells are starting to glow from within. You trudge over, hugging your arms to your chest. The desert mornings are surprisingly cold, and your thin lion tunic isn't exactly north face. No one says good morning. In ancient Egypt, mornings begin in silence and heat. You grab your designated paddly flat wooden board used to slide dough into the oven without setting your hands on fire and start brushing the last batch of ash from the baking floor. Everything here is caked in flour and soot. You're starting to smell like a loaf yourself. In a few weeks, you'll learn to tell time by the angle of the sun on the baking wall and how close your tunic is to catching fire. The duff is waiting. Mixed last night and left to ferment under a lion cloth weighted with a rock. Yeast, in ancient Egypt, isn't store-bought. It's ambient wild microbes from the Nile air, from the hands that mix, from the tools that rarely get washed. If the starter smells like old beer, it's doing great. If it smells like feet and screams, it might be cursed. Still, you knead it dutifully. The texture is sticky, stiff, reluctant. Like it knows what's coming. You dust the slab with more flour gritty, sand-sparkled stuff ground yesterday and get to work. Each loaf is roughly the size of a baby's head. You shape them by memory, not measurement. Ancient Egyptian recipes weren't written down. They were sung, whispered, or just felt in the fingertips. Flat today, Hotep grunts. You nod. That means disc-shaped loaves. They bake faster and fit neatly into offering baskets. Triangular ones are for funnel. Cone-shaped ones are temple exclusive. There's even a theory historians still argue about this, that each shape had a coded meaning. Round loaves for Ra, pointy ones for the pyramids, maybe. Or maybe bakers just got bored and started freestyling. As you begin shaping, your hands move in rhythm. Squash, flatten, twist. The dough resists, then yields. Like a camel finally agreeing to sit down. The oven crackles behind you, a living thing that sighs and growls in equal measure. The smell, not bad. Warm, earthy, a bit sour. The sun begins to rise. It doesn't so much appear as spill. Light cascades over the walls of Thebes, turns the limestone buildings golden, sets fire to the tops of palm trees. You pause. For a moment, everything is quiet except for the sizzle of the oven. Then Hotep ruins it. You're late with the temple batch. Cue panic. You grab the loaves and slide them into the oven, each one hitting the hot floor with a soft thud. Timing is crucial. Too early, they burn. Too late, they collapse. There's no timer, no beeping. You rely on instinct, smell, and the occasional yelp when the paddle gets too hot. While they bake, you prepare the sinnet basket for the first delivery. It's lined with reeds and woven tight, designed to carry bread across town without it bouncing out into the street. You've seen it happen. Once, a loaf tumbled down the steps and got scooped up by a stray ibis. It flew off with its prize, leaving behind one feather and a curse. Hotep pulls the loaves from the oven with the grace of someone who's done this more times than his blink. The bottoms are scorched slightly, as they always are. Blackening the base was intentional. It kept the loaves firmer, made them easier to carry, and possibly helped kill off some of the bacterial freeloaders that came with Nile humidity. You stack the still steaming bread into the basket, and set off for the temple. The streets are waking up. A woman with an amphora of beer on her shoulder nods at you. Children chase a goat that seems entirely uninterested in being chased. You pass two fishermen arguing about nets. One of them gestures with a fish. It's unclear whether this is a threat or a bribe. The temple looms ahead, white walls, cool shade, and the quiet menace of bureaucracy. A scribe meets you at the gate. Is tall, thin, and smells like papyrus and disappointment. Bread is late, he says, without looking at you. Loaves were shaped by Rez's own sunbeam. You reply. It's the standard excuse. He opens the basket, inspects the loaves, and actually sniffs one. Then he breaks it open. A fine plume of steam escapes. He frowns. This one is gritty, he mutters. You resist the urge to say, they're all gritty, genius. It's ancient Egypt. But you stay silent. That's rule number 1 in temple dealings. Speak only when summoned to. The scribe takes a small stylus and marks your delivery on a clay tablet. You're officially compensated, likely with another batch of grain that'll become tomorrow's flour. The economy here isn't built on gold. It's built on carbs. As you leave, you catch sight of the inner sanctum, rows of fresh offerings, loaves, beer jugs, fruit, a duck that may or may not still be twitching. Bread is placed carefully in front of a statue of the god Amun. It's symbolic, of course. The gods didn't eat the offerings. They just absorbed their essence. Like reverse DoorDash. You pause, watching the priest perform a chant over the bread. He touches it, lifts it, breaks it, then places it down again. You realize something odd. The gods are being offered the same sandy, stone-sprinkled loaves that ruin your jaw every morning. No special batch. No divine gluten-free version. Just this. There's something strangely democratic about that. Whether you're a farmer, a noble, or an immortal deity, you all eat the same dusty bread. A donkey brays behind you, snapping you out of your reverie. Time to get back to the bakery. There are still 40 more loaves to bake, and Hotep probably already lit something on fire. You return to the bakery with dust on your feet and a cramp in your left shoulder from carrying the bread basket. The sun is properly up now, wide, blinding, and already nosing toward don't touch anything metal levels. Inside the bakery, the air is thick with heat and flour. A few other apprentices are slapping duff onto hot stones, and Hotep is hunched over the quernstone, grinding grain with a scowl like it owes him back pay. Your turn, he says without looking. Oh joy. You shuffle toward the saddle quern, a large flat stone with a heavy upper hand stone, shaped like a loaf but much less edible. It's how emmer wheat gets turned into flour here. And it is, without exaggeration, the worst workout imaginable. You kneel on a reed mat, grab the upper stone with both hands, and start grinding in a slow, back and forth motion. It's like rowing a boat made of rocks. Except the boat never moves. And there's sand in your face. The grain crunches beneath the stone. The rhythm is hypnotic. Push, pull, push, pull. Eventually, you forget your arms are on fire, and your knees are numb. You just grind. Tiny puffs of flour drift into the air like ghosts of bread yet to be. But here's the problem. This process doesn't just break down the grain. It also scrapes off micro bits of the grinding stone itself. That's the gritty secret of Egyptian flour, literally gritty. Silica, quartz, and bits of stone get mixed right in with your emmer. And no one's inventing sieves fine enough to fix that for a few centuries. Historians have a field day with this. Skeletal remains from ancient Egypt show massive tooth wear, especially on molars. People's teeth were ground down almost flat like they'd been chewing bricks. Which, in a way, they had. Dental abscesses, gum infections, even bone loss in the jaw, lovingly catalogued by archaeologists who seem weirdly excited about ancient tooth decay. You pause to flex your fingers and shake out your shoulders. The other apprentice beside you, a girl named Kim, grins. Bet yours isn't as sandy as mine, she says. Wanna chew on a rock and find out, you reply. She laughs, then winces. Her jaw clicks. A common occupational hazard. Despite the drawbacks, this flour is sacred. It's the basis of all sustenance here. Bread is so essential that even the word for food and bread are often the same. And the grain, stored in massive state-controlled silos and doled out like treasure, which it basically is. The pharaoh doesn't rule with a golden scepter. He rules with a granary key. As you keep grinding, you notice something else, little black specks in the flour. Not sand. Not grain. Charcoal. From the fire pit. You sigh. The bakery is one giant contamination machine. But again, this is normal. Ancient Egyptian bread was rustic. To put it kindly, loaves often included not just sand and ash, but bits of straw, chaff, even insects. Protein bonus. And yet people loved it. Why? Because in a world where food could be scarce, bread was a sure thing. It kept you alive. It was portable, filling, easy to store, and not bad when dumped in beer. Which, by the way, is what most Egyptians drink instead of water. Nile water isn't exactly Evian. Fermenting it into beer makes it safer. Plus, it goes great with bread. Kind of like an eternal happy hour. Hotep calls over. Enough. Flour, make the pass. You carry the flour over to the mixing trough, a carved wooden basin, and add water from a cracked clay jug. You stir slowly with a stick, then your hands. The texture is satisfying. Thick. Plumpy. Not quite duff yet, but getting there. As you mix, Hotep leans in. You know, he says, voice low, they say one baker got caught mixing ground limestone into the flour. You blink. Why? To stretch the grain. Save money. The loaves looked fine, but everyone who ate them started puking. One priest said he saw stars in broad daylight. What happened to the baker? Hotep shrugs. No more stars for him. Whether that's literal or metaphorical, you don't ask. But it does explain the strange skull-shaped bread stamp hanging on the wall. A warning. Or just Hotep's idea of decor. You finish mixing and start shaping new loaves. These are small bite-sized offerings for household gods. Unlike temple offerings, these go on private shrines. Families bake them daily or buy them from roadside vendors. There's even a tiny pyramid of them stacked on the windowsill of the bakery, turning rock hard in the sun. You're pretty sure they've been there since the last dynasty. Himi joins you, rolling duff balls between her palms. My uncle says he saw Crocodile steal a loaf once. You raise an eyebrow. Like, from a market stall. No, she says, completely serious. From a boat. Climbed in. Took it. Left. You don't know what's more disturbing, that it happened, or that it apparently were. Maybe crocodiles prefer whole grain. Historians still argue whether bread made for offerings had to be edible, or if some were purely symbolic ritually baked but never eaten. There's evidence that some loaves were made of clay and painted to look real. Others might have been packed with herbs or resins, fragrant but not exactly digestible. Like the fruit cakes of the ancient world. Hotep inspects your batch and grunts approval. You slide them into the oven carefully, using your now burning paddle. The fire licks at the loaves. The bakery hums with motion. Kneading, shaping, baking, sweating. And over it all sin. In your hair. Your ears. Your flour. Your future. It's not just a nuisance. It's a legacy. Thousands of years later, people will find your bread in Thebes. Petrified, yes. But intact. Cracked open like time capsules. And inside, they'll find sand. Because you didn't just bake bread. You baked the desert into history. You're halfway through your shift, and already crusted in flour like a ghost who took a nap in a grain bin. The sun's risen high now, blinding everything with a golden glaze, and it's time for your second errand of the day, delivering loaves to the temple of Hathor. This isn't just any temple. This one's fancy plastered walls, painted columns, and enough incense to make your eyes water. You load a basket with fresh bread still warm, firm, and ever so slightly sand-speckled and hoisted over your shoulder. The walk through the city is bustling. Market stalls overflow with dates, fish, and cloth dyed in improbable shades of purple. Donkeys bray. Children run barefoot through puddles of Nile mud. One of them points at your bread basket and whispers, "That one's burned." You pretend not to hear. As you arrive at the temple gate, a low hum of chanting meets your ears. A procession of priests draped in spotless linen walks slowly past. One of them carries a lotus. Another is inexplicably holding a monkey. The bread is for the morning offering. Hathor, goddess of joy, music, and motherhood, is apparently a fan of carbs. The temple has its own bakery, of course, but you were commissioned to bring the good stuff. You suspect this has less to do with your baking skill and more to do with Hotep's cousin being married to a priestess here. Nepotism, like sand, gets into everything. Inside the temple, the air is cool and perfumed. Palm beams arch overhead. You're led to a small antechamber filled with offerings, figs, beer, perfume jars, and rows upon rows of bread. Some are shaped like flowers. Some like birds. Some are simply pyramids of golden brown. You place your basket among them and take a moment to admire the edible skyline you've contributed to. A priestess appears, inspecting your delivery. She wears a collar of turquoise beads and smells faintly of frankincense. "These are acceptable," she says, and you swear her nose wrinkles slightly. "But next time, less burnt." Hathor prefers a lighter crust. You nod, trying not to imagine the goddess filing a complaint. The priestess gestures toward a table where two scribes sit, inscribing the day's offerings on papyrus scrolls. It's more than just record-keeping, it's accounting. The gods must be properly fed, and the paperwork must show it. You glance at the scribe on the left, his muttering as he works, lips moving in rhythm to the stylus. Then he pauses. His brow furrows. He picks up one of your loaves and cracks it open. A plume of steam escapes. "So, does a small stone." He says, turning it over. "Extra mineral content today." You brace for criticism, but instead, he nods thoughtfully. Strengthens the jaw. "Or breaks it," you offer. He grins. "Yes, well, the gods don't you. This is true. Ritual bread wasn't consumed by the deities so much as spiritually inhaled. The belief was that the life force, of the offering was absorbed. The priests, however, very much did eat the bread afterward. That's why your delivery mattered. A bad batch meant grumpy gods and grumpy priests. A lose-lose scenario. You step aside as another offering is brought in, this one shaped like a cow, with dates for eyes. It's charming, if slightly disturbing. One of the priests raises an eyebrow. "Special festival loaf," he explains. "Represents Hathor's sacred animal. They'll burn it whole." You're not sure if that's better or worse than eating it. The scribe looks up from his scroll. "Do you know why we stamp our loaves?" You nod. "Identification." He snorts. "Yes, but more than that. It's a signature, a message to the gods. Every loaf says, 'This came from me, with my hands, my labor. It carries my name into eternity.'" You think of the seal Hotep uses, the one pressed into every batch like a proud parent signing a bad report card. You never thought of it that way, bread as immortality. There's a strange dignity in that. As you leave the temple, the smell of incense clings to your skin. Outside, the sun is blinding again. You pause in the courtyard, where a small statue of Hathor smiles beatifically under a fig tree. At her feet are dozens of tiny loaves, offerings from locals. Some are still warm. Others are hard as bricks. One is half-eaten, possibly by a cat. You sit on a low bench to rest. A cat indeed saunters by, tail high, eyeing the bread like it owns the place. It probably does. You pull out one of the extra loaves from your basket and crack it open. Inside, fluffy, slightly sweet, and yes, a little crunchy. You chew slowly, watching the courtyard flicker with shadows from the fig leaves above. It's quiet here. Peaceful. For a moment, the noise of Thebes fades. You're just a baker, resting after work, with warm bread in your hands and crumbs in your lap. Then thwack. A date hits you square in the forehead. You look up. One of the temple boys is in the tree, grinning. You drop something. He calls. You shake your head, laughing despite yourself, and flick a crumb in his direction. The cat watches this with disdain, then curls up beside the statue to nap. Somewhere behind the temple walls, priests chant. Somewhere ahead, Hotep is probably throwing something. But for now, in the shade of a goddess, with bread in your belly and flour in your hair, everything feels whole, even if it's still a little sandy. You're not supposed to be here, not really. Not inside the palace kitchens. But Hotep got called to deliver a special order to the royal food staff, and you, lucky apprentice, that you are, got dragged along to carry the basket. Now you're standing at the edge of a culinary whirlwind. It's not a bakery. It's not a kitchen. It's a machine. And it smells incredible. Also terrifying. You try not to make eye contact with the guards at the doorway. Their spears are sharp, and their eyebrows sharper. You hug the basket of temple-grade bread to your chest like a sacred relic and follow Hotep inside. The kitchen is a sprawling hall of activity. Fires roar in stone pits. Bronze pots bubble and hiss. Servants rush by carrying trays of roasted quail, figs stuffed with honey, and what appears to be a goat with pomegranate seeds jammed where its eyes should be. You're 80 sure that's decorative. Your job is simple: drop off the bread and don't touch anything. You immediately fail at that second part because you can't stop staring. At the center of it all is a long stone table, where the head cook, a woman named Nefer, barks orders with the authority of a general. Her jewelry clinks as she moves. Her expression says she has killed loaves that displeased her. Put the bread there, she snaps without looking at you. You do, carefully arranging the loaves as though they are fragile artifacts instead of crunchy jaw traps. Some of them are the standard round discs. Others, well, one shaped like a crocodile, another like the Eye of Horus. Royal bread is extra. Nefer finally turns to inspect them. She picks one up, taps it with her fingernail, then breaks it in half. Steam rises. Crumbs fall. And there it is, that telltale grind between her teeth as she samples. You wince. She chews slowly, expression unreadable. Then, crunchy. Hotep nods, solemnly. Brown fresh this morning. She smirks. Of course it was. That's how I know it's real. Apparently in the royal kitchens, a little crunch is a sign of authenticity. No fake flour here. If your bread doesn't sandblast your gums, is it even Egyptian? You look around at the royal pantry. It's an entire chamber, cool and shadowy, lined with clay jars taller than your shoulders. Inside, honey, dates, beer, barley, coriander, lentils, and more grain than your village season a month. There's even a shelf just for salt, a luxury in most homes, but here, abundant. A servant opens one jar and pulls out something unexpected, a bread loaf wrapped in linen. Last week's, he mutters. Still soft. Nefer glances at it. Give it to the hounds. Ah yes, royal dogs. You've heard about them. Spoiled creatures that live better than most farmers. The rumor is, one of them has its own tiny chair at dinner. You hope that's not true. You really hope it is. You edge closer to the shelf marked with the royal seal. There, nestled among the loaves, is a peculiar one, rectangular, ridged on top like a comb, and darkened around the edges. What's that one for? You ask. Nefer raises an eyebrow. That's the pharaoh's travel bread. Travel bread, she nods. Dried hard, wrapped in linen, soaked in beer. Before eating. Keeps for weeks. You stare at it. It looks like something you'd use to scrape barnacles off a boat. Apparently, even the king isn't spared from the nation's signature chewiness. Historians still debate whether royal bread was significantly better than commoners. Some say the pharaoh got access to refined flour, sieved and sifted until it sparkled. Others argue the symbolic unity of Egypt meant everyone ate from the same basic loaf, just shaped differently, and maybe brushed with honey. Maybe. A commotion draws your attention to the other side of the kitchen. A young servant has dropped a tray of lentil cakes, and Nefer is launching into a verbal evisceration that would make a soldier cry. You decide it's time to go. Hotep nudges you. Let's go. We're not invited to dinner. As you turn to leave, you pass by a tray of experimental loaves, each one shaped like a tiny pyramid. They're beautiful. Almost too perfect to eat. Almost. You reach the bakery just as the sun hits. Its cruelest angle directly overhead. Your tunic clings to you. You're hungry, dusty, and have never wanted something cold more in your life. Naturally, you get more bread. Kimi hands you a fresh loaf and joins you on the shaded bench near the wall. You both chew quietly, watching the heat shimmer off the stones. This one's good, she says through a mouthful. Crunchy though. You nod, swallowing. I think I chipped a tooth. She grins. You'll be buried with it. That's not just a joke. People really were buried with their teeth. Or what was left of them. Tums often included entire baskets of bread real or clay to ensure the dead wouldn't go hungry. After all, eternity is long. You don't want to spend it craving carbs. You stretch out your legs, feeling the sun slide behind a cloud for the briefest moment. The city hums around you. Somewhere, a musician plays a reed flute. A donkey protests its existence. You lean back, letting the heat sink into your bones. And as you crunch through your loaf, crumbs catching on your chin, you think about that travel bread, that royal pantry, the gods and their offerings, and the fact that, no matter how high or holy someone is, they're probably also chewing sand. It's weirdly comforting. The bread is still warm when you carry the next batch into the courtyard, but it smells a little suspicious. Not bad exactly. Just off. Like someone baked ambition into it but forgot the yeast. Hotep gives it a long sniff and a longer sigh. This was the barley batch, he mutters. Mixed by Nebo. You glance over at Nebu, the youngest apprentice, who's currently upending a jar of ani over what was supposed to be a loaf shaped like a jackal. The ani is melting too fast. The jackal looks like it's crying. Hotep shakes his head. Barley flour's trickier. Doesn't rise well. Too dense. Makes a sad loaf. You nod, although it seems every loaf around here looks a little sad. Or possibly menacing. Still, today's work must go on. You're assigned to quality check the cooled loaves and prepare a few for the grain inspectories. That's a real job. Ancient Egypt had entire bureaucracies built around grain and bread. And while it sounds dull, these officials were deadly serious. They measured portions, recorded rations, and occasionally threw people in jail for underbaking. Which is awkward when the evidence is edible. Hotep sets the tone with a cautionary tale. A baker in Memphis once skimped on flour, patted the duff with ground date pits, and passed off the loaves as new style. The next day, his bakery was shut down and all his date trees mysteriously caught fire. Nobody talked about it, but everyone talked about it. You pick up a loaf and examine it. The crust is fine. The stamp is clean. You break it open. Crunch. There it is again. The gentle reminder that you are, in fact, eating pulverized rock. You look over at Kimi, who's inspecting loaves with a little wooden pick. Found anything? She shrugs. A beetle. Half a date. And something I'm choosing to believe is a raisin. Good enough. Just as you're loading the inspection tray, the bakery door slams open and in marches one of the grain official stall, broad-shouldered, and wearing enough eye makeup to be mistaken for a very judgmental falcon. He carries a staff that probably doesn't need to be that large. Behind him, a scribe scribbles furiously on a piece of papyrus. Morning inspection, the official booms. You bow. Hotep does not. He nods and hands over a loaf like it's a formal duel. The inspector cracks it open, sniffs it, rubs his fingers inside the crumb. Sandy, he says. You wait. But fair. You exhale. Prizes narrowly averted. Then he picks up another and frowns. This one's light. Hotep's eyes narrow. Same flour. Same batch. Lighter by a thumb's width, the inspector replies, placing the loaf on a balanced scale. Historians today still debate how strictly these inspections were enforced. Some argue the records show standardization across bakeries, with weights and quality carefully monitored. Others suggest there was flexibility, especially for temple-affiliated bakeries or royal kitchens. In any case, in your bakery, the scrutiny is real. The inspector pokes the loaf with the butt of his staff. Well, deduct 1 sack of grain for underweight product, he declares. Hotep doesn't flinch. Then you'll get 1 fewer loaf tomorrow. The inspector stares. Hotep stares back. Eventually, the inspector grunts, scribbles something on the scribe's tablet, and marches off. You wait until they're gone before letting out a breath you didn't realize you were holding. Kimmy snorts. You know what this means, she says. You nod. We bake the next batch bigger. Hotep adds, but not better. The gods don't need perfection. Just volume. You can tell if that's cynical wisdom or just sarcasm baked in. Later that afternoon, a vendor arrives short, round, and so dusty he looks like someone shook out a rug. They's selling imported grain. Which is suspicious, since you haven't seen a boat come in for days. He offers a deal, double the volume for half the price. Hotep eyes the sack, pokes a few kernels. Half of this is chaff, he mutters. But it's foreign chaff, the vendor insists. You're sent back into the bakery before you can hear the conclusion. But later, you spot the vendor running from the alley, pursued by a goat that definitely wasn't part of the transaction. That night, you lie on your mat, arms itching, fingernails still stained with flour. You stare at the ceiling wooden beams strewn with garlic and old dreams. Outside, a chorus of frogs sings from the riverbank. You think about how fragile the bread business is. Not just because of fire or sand or goat-related scams, but because so much depends on things outside your control. The Nile flooding, the wind blowing grit into the oven, the grain inspector waking up on the wrong side of the mat. Still, you made loaves today. Dozens of them. Some too light, some too dense. A few just right. And despite everything, the heat, the shouting, the broken crusts, you feel oddly proud. You drift toward sleep thinking of a single fact. Even pharaohs were taxed in bread. It might not be the smoothest currency. Or the cleanest. But it's the one everyone can chew. Sourdough. This morning, you're not grinding, shaping, or delivering. You're fermenting. Specifically, you've been assigned the glorious task of feeding the bakery's yeast beast a bubbling, unpredictable clay vat full of froth, funk, and potential disaster. You're in charge of the starter today, Hotep announces, handing you a jug of swampy-smelling liquid. You peer inside. It looks like something that should have a warning label and possibly a curse. Is this beer? Almost, he says. Yesterday's runoff. Fermented barley mash. Still alive. Don't spill it. You do not feel reassured. In ancient Egypt, commercial yeast doesn't exist. Instead, bakers rely on wild fermentation microbes floating through the air, clinging to barley skins, or hiding in the cracks of well-used jars. Every bakery has its own sort-of-like culture, passed down like a moody family heirloom. And today, you get to babysit it. You pour the liquid into the starter vathic, already half-fermented duff sitting in a squat clay pot beside the oven. It immediately bubbles, gurgles, and lets off a burp that sounds vaguely sarcastic. Himi walks by and fans her nose. Smells like the Nile on a hot day. You nut. Do we know it's not possessed? Nope, she replies, cheerfully. That's part of the fun. Fermentation is mysterious, even now. Back then, it was downright magical. Bread that rises. Must be a gift from the gods or a prank from the demons, depending on how your loaf turns out. Historians still argue whether Egyptian bakers understood the microbial process or just learned from trial, error, and the occasional exploded duh. You stir the starter slowly with a paddle, watching bubbles rise to the surface like ghosts. The smell is sour and sweet, with a faint tang of alcohol. That's good. Probably. Once it's foamy and sufficiently smelly, you scoop a ladleful into the mixing trough and combine it with fresh flour and water. The dough forms slowly, stubbornly. You knead it until your arms protest. Then let it rest. Meanwhile, Hotep is experimenting. He's making beer bread, a hybrid that uses old beer sediment instead of water. It smells stronger, fruitier, and possibly flammable. He pours it into small molds, pats them flat, and sets them in a separate oven that smokes like an irritated spirit. You ever had a beer loaf? He asks. You shake your head. Good. You might live longer. He's not joking. There's a fine line between fermenting and rotting, and ancient Egyptians danced along it daily. Without thermometers or refrigeration, timing is everything. Way too long, and your duff turns into sour pass. Bake too early, and it collapses. Bake too late, and it turns into lava rock. You try a piece of the last batch. It's dense, sour, with a strange fizz at the back of your throat. It tastes like bread that dreams of being beer, or beer that got kicked out of fermentation school. Still, you take another bite. It's oddly addictive. You watch Hotep smear a bit of duff on a clay shard, and leave it near the oven. Why? You ask. Test batch, he says. I want to see if the heat near the fire helps it rise faster. You raise an eyebrow. Science. He shrugs. Laziness, but maybe also science. And then, as if summoned by the smell of bubbling yeast, a neighbor shows up. Seke, an old woman with 3 teeth and endless opinions. Your duff smells sour, she says. That's how it's supposed to smell, Hotep grumbles. Not like this, she retorts, leaning in. This smells cursed. Kimi leans toward you. Here we go. Seke begins her favorite rant, that the old ways were better, that her mother's starter could rise a loaf in half an hour, and that your generation doesn't need hard enough. She insists that duff should be blessed with lotus oil, whispered to at sunrise, and stirred only with fade wood. You nod politely while wondering how many loaves she's actually made this century. Still, some of what she says lingers. Lotus oil does smell nice. And figwood paddles are softer on the wrists. Historians still debate how much ritual shaped daily baking practices. Was it religion? Superstition? Or just ancient bakers hedging their bets? You glance back at your duff. It's rising. Slowly, steadily, a gentle dome pushing upward. Alive. You smile. Not cursed after all. Later, Hotep tests the oven's heat with the back of his hand, an ancient thermometer method known as ouch, too hot. Once it's ready, he tosses in a few of the beer loaves. They puff up slightly, go dark fast, and crack loudly as they bake. Himi pulls them out, and lays them on a reed mat to cool. The smell is heavenly bready, malty, warm. Go ahead, she says, handing you a half. You bite in. Boom. Instant regret. The crust is fine, but the middle. A swamp. It oozes. It fizzes. It talks back. You drop it with a yelp. Hotep laughs. Still needs work. Later that evening, you clean the starter jar, feed it a little fresh flour and water, and place it back in the warmest corner of the bakery. You pause. Thanks, you whisper to it. Just in case. Because in a world before microscopes, chemistry, or expiration dates, survival depends on your instincts. And sometimes, on a jar of bubbling swamp duff that might be alive in more ways than one. You've barely set down your paddle when the heat begins to bite. Not politely. Not gently. It gnaws. The bakery oven, already roasting, now turns the whole mud brick room into a kiln. The sun joins in, pouring through the small windows like molten bronze. By midday, it's too hot to knead duff, too hot to think, and far too hot to stand barefoot on the clay floor unless you enjoy sizzling. So what do the bakers do? They flee. Sorta. Hotep waves you out toward the yard behind the bakery, a patch of packed earth shaded by leaning palm fronds and half-hearted lion awnings. It's not cool, but it's less deathy. A few battered stools sit under the shade, and the smell of rising bread is joined by something herbal. Kim is already there, sitting with her tunic hiked up to fan her knees. Beside her, an open clay jar bubbles with a greenish pest. What's that, you ask? She dips her fingers in and smears it on her arms. For cuddle done. You blink. Sorry. Sunscreen, she says brightly. Keeps the sun off. Sort of. You squint at the jar. It's textured. Ancient Egyptians were masters of herbal medicine, but also had a few theories that leaned heavily into experimental. One of them, mixing crocuddle done with natron and various plant oils, then slathering it on skin to block the sun. Historians still argue whether this was actually about of protection or just ritual. Purification. Either way, it smells like something that should stay buried. Hotep appears with his own personal concoction, a sticky blend of crushed lotus petals, mud, and beer dregs. He rubs it on his cheeks with the seriousness of a man preparing for battle. You'll burn otherwise, he says, eyeing your unprotected skin. With a sigh, you dab a little on your arms. It's cool, in a slimy sort of way. The scent, fermented flowers mixed with a hint of swamp monster. You settle onto a stool, watching flies buzz in lazy loops overhead. Somewhere nearby, a donkey makes a sound like it's reliving trauma. The air shimmers with heat and scent. Hini fans herself with a basket lid. I heard the baker in Luxor uses crushed malachite in his sun past. You frown. Is it that? Copper ore, she nods. Green. Pretty. Probably toxic. You both laugh, then cough as a breeze stirs the dung jar. The conversation shifts lazily from whose bread molds fastest in the heat, to which street sells the best beer, to what it actually feels like to be kissed in a date orchard. That last one gets a lot of jiggles and one scandalized gasp when Seki the neighbor pokes her head over the wall and yells, not in front of the flower. Still, it's peaceful here. Bakers in ancient Egypt worked hard, but they knew when to rest. The midday sun was not to be challenged. Bread could wait. Teeth could suffer later. You pull your knees up and lean back, letting your eyelids droop. The heat slows your thoughts. The past on your arms begins to dry, forming a weirdly satisfying crust. You're becoming bread, you realize. You ever wonder, Kimmy says, if we're the only people in the world putting poop on our skin and calling it innovation? You snort. Probably not. And yet, somehow it works. You don't burn. You don't faint. You sit and wait while the duff rests and the sun slotches toward a more tolerable angle. Around you, life hums. A bee lands in the crook of your elbow, investigates, decides against it. A lizard scuttles across the wall. Somewhere far off, a priest is chanting. Somewhere closer, Hotep is dozing while still upright. You try to count how many loaves you've made this week. You lose track around 40. Your shoulders ache. Your palms are dry and scratched. And still, you know tomorrow you will rise before the sun, grind more stone into your flour, and start again. Because people always need bread. Even if it crunches like gravel and smells faintly of yesterday's crocodile. Eventually, Hotep stirs. Back to work, he mutters. You peel yourself off the stool, brush flakes of mud and dung from your skin, and head back inside. The oven is still hot. The duff is ready. And so are you. As you reach for the first ball of duff, Kimmy taps your shoulder. Your neck's peeling. You touch it. Sand. Of course. Back inside the bakery, the temperature feels like walking into the mouth of an angry deity. Your feet crunch over spilled flour, dry duff, and something that might have been an onion 2 days ago. The air is heavy with yeast, ash, and the kind of tang that suggests someone left a jug of beer too close to the oven. Hotep waves you over. We've got a medical order. You pause. A what? He gestures at a small scroll tied with a reed string. From the temple of Sekhmet. They need moldy bread. You stare at him. He nods seriously. For healing. Of course. In ancient Egypt, medicine and food were less of a Venn diagram and more of a single, crumb-covered circle. Bread wasn't just for eating, it was for fixing. You've heard stories. Priests stuffing wounds with bread paste. Bread soaked in beer used as a poultice. Bread baked with garlic, cumin, or ani applied to everything from infected cuts to sore teeth. Historians today are weirdly impressed. Turns out, some moldy bread does produce antibacterial compounds. Think of it as ancient penicillin, minus the lab coat. Still, the line between curative and concerning was blurred. Hotep pulls a basket from the back room. It's filled with rejected loaves, misshapen, overcooked, undercooked, and the occasional forgotten relic now sprouting blue fuzz. You pick one up carefully. It smells like sadness and wet sandals. This cures people, he shrugs. Or kills them. Depends on the priest. You place a few of the greenest loaves into a reed-woven tray and cover it with a lion cloth. The scroll says to deliver it to the temple urgently, which is odd. You're not sure how time-sensitive a mold loaf is, but who are you to question holy instructions? As you head out, Kimi follows, carrying a jar of beer as an extra offering. For sterilization, she explains. You suspect it's also for sipping on the walk. The temple of Sekhmet looms a headless ornate than Hathor's, more intimidating. Sekhmet is the lion-headed goddess of plague, war, and healing. Basically, she decides whether you recover. Or don't. You arrive at the rear gate where the sick are brought in. The scene is strangely calm. 2. Priests in leopard print robes usher you into a shaded corridor, where a man lies moaning softly under a lion sheet. A healer greets you. She's tall, stern, and wearing a necklace made entirely of dried lotus pods. You've brought the mold. You nod and hand over the basket. She inspects the loaves with a critical eye, then cracks one open. A cloud of spores wafts out. Everyone blinks. One priest coughs dramatically. The healer nods in approval. Good fermentation. This will draw out the pus. You're not hungry anymore. Himi passes the beer jug over, and the healer dips a cloth into it. She wipes her hands, then gestures for one of the priests to prep the patient. You get a glimpsing ugly gash on the thigh, red and angry. She applies the moldy bread directly to the wound, wraps it with linen, then says a brief prayer that involves several throat-clearing hisses and the phrase devourer of disease. Ancient Egyptian medicine blends science and magic like flour and water. The spell is as important as the cell. They believe illness is caused by demons, curses, or angry gods. Bread, imbued with prayer and purpose, is both remedy and symbol. You back away slowly, grateful that your role ends at delivery. Outside, you and Kimi sit under a palm tree and sip the leftover beer. It's sour, flat, but cold enough to pass for refreshing. You think it works? She asks. You shrug. Better than done past. She raises her jug. The sacred mold. You clink your cup against hers. A toast to bread's least glamorous role. Back at the bakery, Hotep is waiting with a new experiment. His baking loaves with garlic and dried sakam or figs apparently, for a midwife in town who swears it keeps mothers safe during childbirth. Bread with benefits, he mutters. You help mix the batch. The smell is sharp and sweet, and for once, not entirely dusty. The duff rises quickly in the warm air. You shape it into small domes, poke tiny holes in the top, and press in a fig for decoration. As they bake, you wonder how many people out there owe their lives not to a physician, but to an underpaid baker with a knack for rot. Somewhere in the distance, drums beat. A wedding. A funeral. Possibly both. In ancient Egypt, celebrations and ceremonies often include offerings of bread, each loaf carefully chosen for symbolism, shape, and ingredients. You imagine a noble woman giving birth, gripping a garlic-laced loaf like a lucky charm, or a priest treating a wounded soldier with stale duff and whispered prayers. Bread is more than food. It's medicine, magic, message, and occasionally, very stinky. As the last loaves cool on the mat, you breathe in the scent of figs and smoke. Not bad. Could use more mold. It's barely dawn when Hotep shakes you awake with the gentleness of a man slapping a rug. A funerary order. Your brain, still marinating in sleep, scrambles for meaning. Then you remember, today, you're baking for the dead. Funeral bread isn't just an offering. It's a promise. In ancient Egypt, the journey to the afterlife is long, full of checkpoints, judgment halls, and occasional monster crocodiles that eat your soul if your heart's too heavy. So naturally, the dead need snacks. You rub your eyes, pull on your flour-stiffened tunic, and stumble into the bakery. The fire's already lit. Himai is slicing dried dates and humming a song that sounds cheerful for a death day. Who died? You ask, still yawning. Some noble named Kumhat, she replies. Had 3 wives. 2 showed up to the temple. Third one threw a goose. You blink. At the funeral. At the first wife, she grins. You nod solemnly. He must have been very loved. The loaves for funerals are special. Not because they're tastier if anything. They're tougher but because they're symbolic. Round loaves for the sun god Ra. Triangular ones for the pyramids, eternity, and possibly a baker's sore hands. Long oval loaves, often called soul bread, represent the physical body, something for the spirit to cling to as it navigates the duat, the underworld. You start with the base stuff. Barley flour, emmer flour, a bit of honey, and a touch of sesame if the family's fancy. Hotep insists on adding a splash of date beer to give the duff depth. It mostly smells like someone spilled a tavern into a mixing bowl. Himi shapes the first batch into little domes, each one pressed with a funerary seal and image of an ibis, jackal-headed guardian of the Thames. You shape yours as spirals, an homage to the unending journey. That's what Hotep calls it. You think it just looks cool. There's debate among historians about how literal these loaves were meant to be. Some tims contain petrified bread that's clearly real and edible once, while others include clay replicas. Was the symbolism enough? Or did people truly believe the dead might eat them? You're not sure. But you do know that no tim painting is complete without baskets of loaves, sometimes floating beside oxen, harps, and improbably, relaxed scribes. Bread isn't just sustenance, it's status. Even in death. As the loaves rise, you prepare the offering tray. It's made of painted wood, shaped like a table, and filled with compartments. You load it carefully, 2 triangle loaves, 4 rounds, 1 fish shaped for good luck. Then the centerpiece loaf shaped like the rising sun, scored with rays. It's beautiful. It also weighs about as much as a goat. You carry it, carefully, through the waking city. The funeral procession is already forming outside the house of embalming. Musicians tune their instruments. Mourners wail on cue. A priest stands beside a covered body, reading from a scroll and occasionally nodding, as though proofreading. You and Kimi place the tray among the other offerings, figs, onions, a mummified duck, and several jars of beer. One mourner eyes your son loaf and whispers, "That one's too pretty to bury." Another hisses, "Don't let Kemhet eat it all. He was greedy even in life." You step back and let the ceremony unfold. Incense thickens the air. Chants rise. A harpist plays something haunting. The priests begin the opening of the mouth ritual, symbolically restoring the senses of the dead so they can eat, speak, and argue about goose-related drama in the afterlife. When the bread is lifted to the lips of the mummy, you feel a strange sense of pride. You made that. You made afterlife food. Hotep joins you near the edge of the procession, arms crossed. "Think he'll enjoy it?" you ask. He shrugs. He won't complain. You spend the walk back in silence, dust rising from your sandals, the sounds of mourning fading behind you. Later that day, the bakery is quiet. The oven is cooling. A few leftover loaves from the funeral sit on the mat. One is shaped like an eye, another like a tiny pyramid. You pick one up and bite in. Crunch. Of course. Even in the next life, some things never change. Kimi flops beside you. You think we'll get bread in the afterlife. You chew slowly, considering. "If I do, I hope it's sifted." She laughs, then leans back against the warm wall, hands behind her head. "I hope mine's still warm. And you? You just hope no one throws a goose at your funeral." The morning starts quietly, too quietly. You should have known that was a warning. You're halfway through kneading a batch of temple loaves when the air shifts. First, it's a soft whisper, a gust that sneaks in through the cracks in the wall. Then, a dry scrape across the floor. Kimi pauses, squints toward the window, and mutters something under her breath that sounds distinctly not optimistic. You step outside and look toward the horizon. It's not a storm. It's a wall. A sandstorm. You've seen them before, but this one's moving fast like an army of dust with a grudge. The sky darkens, turning from pale blue to a muddy bronze. Palm trees sway in warning. Far off, someone screams. Or maybe it's just the wind finding its voice. Hotep bursts out of the storeroom holding a sack of flour like it's a baby. He had everything inside. The bakery erupts into chaos. Baskets are overturned. Loaves are shoved into clay jars. The fire is doused with water, steam whooshing like a ghost exhaling. You slam the shutters closed, but not before a gust blasts you in the face with sand so fine it feels like powdered knives. You spit. It tastes like regret and limestone. The duff half kneaded and very much not ready is the problem. If it dries out, the batch is ruined. If it's exposed to sand, it'll bake with the crunch of 1,000 tims. You and Kimi wrap the bowls in damp cloth, stuff them under the kneading bench, and pile baskets on top. The storm hits. The wind screams through the cracks. Dust swirls in like it owns the place. Everything that isn't tied down shifts, rattles, tries to flee. You sit on a sack of grain to keep it from becoming airborne. Kimi clutches the starter jar like it's a sacred relic. Minutes pass. Or maybe hours. The world outside vanishes into shades of rust and roar. You can barely hear Hotep shouting from the back room. "I told you the gods hate barley day." Historians still debate the frequency and impact of sandstorms on ancient Egyptian daily life. Some say they were rare, but devastating. Others argue they were seasonal visitors, annoying, but manageable. Either way, you now understand why so many temples have carvings of people bowing before the wind. Eventually, the howling fades. The light returns in patches. The bakery is dusted in fine golden grit, like someone sneezed on a desert. You cough. A lot. Hotep peeks out from behind a stack of baskets. Everyone alive. Kimi raises a dusty hand. Mostly. You emerge slowly, blinking through the haze. The fire pit is buried. The duff bowls are safe, but the cloths are stiff with dust. One unlucky loaf left too close to the window is now a sandy brick. You knock it against the table. It thuds with the dignity of a tombstone. Well, Hotep sighs. We'll call that one a desert loaf. New specialty. You all laugh, because otherwise you might cry. Cleanup begins. It takes hours. Every jar must be rinsed. Every surface scrubbed. Every tool inspected for hidden grit. You find sand in places that seem physically impossible. Himi dumps out a jug of water. This one's gone crunchy. You lift the bread paddle. It's heavier than usual. Sand between the layers. It screeches when you slide it across the floor. Still, somehow, you save most of the dough. You bake the first batch late, long after the storm has passed and the sun slouches toward the horizon. The loaves come out misshapen but fragrant. One of them has a tiny swirl of sand baked into its crust, a glimmering fossil of the day's chaos. You decide not to tell the temple. Later, sitting outside under a now clear sky, you share the salvageable loaves with the crew. They're slightly gritty. Very gritty. But you eat them anyway. Because this is bread born of battle. You think the pharaoh eats storm bread? Himi asks between bites. You smile. Only if his windows are bad. She chuckles, then points to your arm. You've got dust in your freckles. You glance down. She's right. Every inch of you feels sun-baked and sand-blasted, like a weathered statue with really tired knees. Hotep joins you with a steaming cup of beer. Well, he says, you survived. That's worth something. You clink cups, raise loaves, and let the breeze, which is finally gentle again, carry away the last of the storm's song. And tomorrow, you'll still be here. Still baking. Still sweeping sand from the sole of the bread. You're back at the mixing bench the next morning when a delivery boy, sweaty, out of breath, and missing one sandal, drops off a jug of something suspiciously foamy and grins. From the brewery, he pants. They said don't drink it too fast this time. Hotep takes the jug with the reverence usually reserved for sacred relics. Perfect. Time to make boozy bread. You blink. We're baking with beer again. He nods, already pulling out a battered recipe tablet. The head brewer's trying a new mash. Wants to see if it improves the rise. You lean in for a sniff. The beer smells aggressive. Like fermented ambition mixed with a hint of old dates and possibly revenge. Himi takes a sip and coughs dramatically. Still better than Sekhe's cough tea, she rasps. Ancient Egyptians drank beer like water literally. And the byproducts of beer making were often reused in baking. Leftover yeast sludge, barley mash, even half-fermented wort. Waste not, want not. Plus, the line between brewer and baker was often a dotted one. Many bakeries brewed their own beer. Many breweries baked their own bread. The fermentation never stopped. You mix the beer into a fresh batch of duff. It's wet, sticky, and vaguely fizzy. Himi calls it angry duff. You have to agree. It bubbles at you. Gurgles, even. Alive, Hotep declares, patting it like a small beast. While the duff rests, you help gather kindling for it. Smaller, secondary ovena clay dome Hotep uses for his experimental batches. You call it the bread forge. It's cracked in 3 places and leans slightly to the left, but it gets the job done. As the duff rises and occasionally slumps, then reinflates in protest, you help shape the loaves. These ones are oblong, designed to soak up sauce and beer alike. You press barley seeds into the top for crunch, then slide them into the oven. The scent hits fast, warm yeast, malt, and something almost floral. You exchange a glance with Kimi. This might actually be good, she whispers. Don't say that out loud, you reply. You'll jinx it. The first batch emerges puffed, dark gold, and hissing steam. The crust crackles. The inside. Airy. Springy. Slightly boozy. You bite into a still hot piece, and your eyebrows rise. Okay, you mumble through the chew. This is dangerous. It's soft. Light. With a sweetness that doesn't taste like honey or sugar, but something deeper, fermented barley and ancient sunshine. Hotep nods slowly. Write that one down. We're keeping it. Kimi raises her loaf like a toast. To beer bread. To beer everything, you reply. Outside, the sun climbs higher. Inside, the bakery hums. You crank out a second batch of the beer loaves, this time adding crushed coriander to the dough. It's even better. Later, the head brewer stops by pot-bellied, pink-faced, and carrying a cup that may or may not be his 5th of the morning. He samples a slice. Bless Bastet, he whispers. You made bread that tastes like joy. Hotep beams. You think he might actually blush. The brewer pulls out a jug and hands it to you. This one's darker. Date-rich. Try it next. You nod solemnly, tucking the jug under the bench like a treasure. As the brewer leaves, he shouts over his shoulder. If this goes well, we'll serve it at the next festival. And just like that, you're baking for the party gods. Festivals in ancient Egypt weren't quiet affairs. They were loud, chaotic. Wine-soaked carnivals with dancing, music, feasting, and more bread than you can carry in 2 arms. The goddess Bastet's festival alone reportedly involved boatloads of people drinking so much that they forgot what city they were in. Naturally, bread was the buffer. The responsible sibling to the wild cousin that is beer. You imagine your beer loaf on a festival platter surrounded by roast duck, fig past, and people wearing too much eyeliner. Not bad for something you slap together with brewery runoff. Back at the bakery, you load the last batch onto a tray. You sneak another bite. Crunchy crust. Soft crumb. Hints of date and barley. A warmth that lingers on your tongue. You glance at Hotep. Think we can sell these? He grins. If we don't eat them all first. You both laugh. The line between baker and brewer fades a little more. And for once, the only thing in your bread that crunches is the barley on top. You're midway through the third batch of beer loaf shins sticky. Sleeves rolled up when the tap 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 of a reed staff on stone sends a ripple through the bakery. Hotep freezes. Kimmy freezes. Even the duff seems to pause mid-rise. You turn slowly to see a man in a striped lion robe standing at the entrance, his chin lifted, his eyebrows loaded with disapproval. Behind him, two scribes trail like shadows, one clutching a clay tablet, the other a tiny scale. Not the metaphorical kind. A real one. Grain inspection, the man says, scanning the room like a hawk with tax authority. Oh good, Kimmy mutters. It's him again. You remember this guy. Last time, he accused you of short loafing the temple. That loaf was hollow due to an unfortunate fermentation bubble, but you're still emotionally recovering. Hotep greets him with a bow so shallow it's practically sarcastic. Inspector Pemon, well, none surprise. Pemon doesn't blink. He gestures at your tray of bare loaves. Temple records show this bakery received 12 sacks of barley this moon. We're seeing 8 loaves per sack. Hotep shrugs. Bigger loaves. Suspiciously so. Panemon replies. He lifts one loaf, weighs it in his hand, then nods to the scribe, who sets up the clay scale with great theatricality. One side is filled with bronze weights. The other are low. The loaf barely balances. Hotep smirks. Looks fair to me. The inspector frowns deeper. There have been rumors, he says slowly, that some bakers are watering their grain. Or using shell husks, date bits, even chalk. You blink. Why would anyone do that? To stretch the flour, Kimmy whispers. And ruin the bread. Hotep cuts in, tone firm. We don't cheat. It's true. Even if your loaves sometimes contain more sand than sensibility, the grain is real. You've cracked enough teeth to prove it. But the inspector isn't done. He picks up a triangular funerary loaf from yesterday's batch. This one's light. It's symbolic, you say before you can stop yourself. For the journey to the afterlife. Panemon turns to you with narrowed eyes. So the dead get smaller loaves now, easier to carry. You offer, weakly. Kimmy coughs into her sleeve. The inspector hands the loaf back and scribbles something on a fresh tablet. All grain used here must match the daily ration records. Loaf count, shape, size ill-tracked. Tracked by whom? Hotep asks, voice casual, almost bored. By the state, Panemon says, clearly delighted by his own importance. Bread is the backbone of Maat. To cheat the scale is to disrupt divine order. You resist the urge to point out that the divine order just burped inside your starter jar and tried to bite you yesterday. Historians agree, Egypt had one of the most sophisticated ancient economies. Bread was central to it, not just food, but currency. Laborers were paid in loaves. Temples were funded in grain. Even tax records were calculated by bread equivalents. And with that kind of value, came regulation. Lots of it. Panemon continues his round. He pokes your flour bin. He sniffs the beer jug. He tries unsuccessfully to intimidate Kimmy, who responds by offering him a slightly burned heel piece. He does not accept. Finally, he returns to the doorway. You're on notice, he says. Too many irregularities, and this bakery will be reassigned. Hotep raises an eyebrow. Reassigned to whom? Possibly the North Lot, Panemon replies. The North Lot. You all groan. That bakery is notorious. It's run by a man who once tried to bake bread on top of the oven instead of inside it. His loaves are shaped like obelisks and taste like regret. You stand in silence as the inspector vanishes down the alley, scribes trailing behind him like underfed geese. Hotep lets out a breath. I'd rather bake in a pit than hand our grain over to the North Lot. Kimmy dumps a scoop of flour into a bowl with more force than necessary. That man eats honey and weighs other people's crumbs. You get back to work, hands moving faster now. Angry kneading is surprisingly effective. The dough surrenders under your palms, taking on the tension of the room. You shape each loaf with care. Even the crusty ones get a neat stamp. If Panemon checks again, he'll find loaves that could win awards. Or at least pass inspection. Later, as the sun sets, you sit outside with Kimmy and split one of the better loaves warm, yeasty, perfectly golden. You chew slowly. Think he'll come back, you ask. She shrugs. Probably. He likes the smell of his own tablet. Hotep joins you, sipping beer from a chipped cup. Next time, he says, we weigh him. You all laugh. Because sometimes, the only way to survive a system made of sand and bureaucracy is with jokes, stubbornness, and just the right amount of yeast. The bakery smells different today. Smokier. Earthier. Like something's burning on purpose. Hotep's up before dawn, grinding herbs with unusual concentration. You peek into the mortar, rosemary, garlic, some bitter-looking root you can't identify. Him is shaping. Unusually flat, wide loaves almost like slabs. No one is talking much. Special order. You finally ask. Ritual batch. Hotep replies without looking up. Temple of Amun. Burnt offering. You blink. We're burning bread on purpose now. Kimi shrugs. Not all bread is meant to be eaten. Turns out, today's baking isn't for the living, or even the dead. It's for the gods but not the tasty, warm loaf on a plate kind of gods. This is for Amun's fire pit. Bread that will be blackened beyond recognition, crumbled into ash, and tossed into sacred flames with incense, oil, and prayer. You help mix the ritual dough. It's drier than usual, stiff with extra barley husks and no sweetener at all. It smells like discipline. You knead until your wrists itch, then flatten the dough into thick discs. Hotep scores each with the bakery's seal, then adds a second mark, an eye carved with a dull reed knife. For protection, he mutters. You glance at the instructions etched on a wax tablet. Bake until cracked, blistered, dark. Surface must fracture. Sounds like my soul after inspection day, Kimi whispers. You laugh, but quietly. Even the duff feels serious. There's debate among modern scholars about the purpose of these burnt offerings. Were they literal meals for the gods, meant to ascend in smoke? Or symbols of sacrifice, bread offered, then destroyed, to show piety? Some think it was about purification. Others say it was more like filing a divine report. Either way, the loaves are made, the oven is stoked hot enough to bake pottery, and the first round goes in. They don't rise. They crack. They split. They blacken. The crusts fracture like dried river beds. When Hotep pulls them out, they hiss softly, steaming slightly as the heat escapes. He nods. Perfect. You line them in a reed tray, wrap the top with linen, and prepare for the walk. The sun is still rising, casting long gold shadows across the mud brick streets. You pass a woman sweeping dust off her roof, and a boy, balancing an amphora of milk like his in a circus. The Temple of Amun is quiet, surprisingly so. Incense curls from stone censers. A row of priests chant in low voices, creating a drone that buzzes in your chest. You deliver the tray to the side chamber where offerings are sorted. A senior priest inspects your loaves. These will burn well, he says with approval. Did you use cedar oil? Olive, Hotep replies. Cedar's too thick. The priest nods, then places a small scarab amulet atop the top loaf. Well, light them during the midday rites. You stay just long enough to witness the start of the ritual. The loaves are stacked on a flat stone slab, then surrounded with powdered incense and small cups of oil. A priest steps forward, sings a hymn to Amun, and lights the corner. The flame spreads slowly. The bread crackles, then catches. Smoke rises in twisting, graceful spirals, curling upward like it has somewhere to be. You watch until it stings your eyes. Back at the bakery, the air feels lighter, like something's been lifted. Or maybe that's just the lack of shouting. Kimi pulls out the regular duff batch, fluffier, less apocalyptic, and hands you a piece. Normal bread, she says. No gods involved. You knead quietly, feeling the shift in your palms. Ritual bread is stiff, stubborn. Daily bread is yielding, warm. Both are sacred, in their own way. Hotep leans against the bench, arms folded. Burnt loaves aren't wasted, he says. They feed the part of us that needs meaning. You nod. Even if they taste like charcoal. He grins. Especially then. Later, as the sun hits its peak and the oven roars again, you find a small blackened crumb left over from the burnt offering. You hold it between your fingers. It crumbles easily. It disappears. And you think, not everything is meant to last. But some things, especially the ones you burn on purpose, linger in the air long after the bread is gone. The sun sets slow and nearby over Thebes, gilding the edges of every mud brick wall and wheat stalk like the gods themselves are finger painting with light. The day is nearly done. So are your hands. You sit on a low bench outside the bakery, forearms dusted with flour, one sandal half off, the other missing entirely. Hotep is asleep, sitting upright, arms folded, head bobbing like a reed in the breeze. Kim is beside you, chewing a crusty heel with admirable determination. Today was long. Yesterday was longer. And yet, somehow, you've made it through another cycle of flour, fire, and an alarming quantity of sand in places sand should never be. You glance down at your fingernails. They're stained with duff and something that might be molasses from the short-lived honey crust experiment. You remember it well, mostly because it caught fire. But you also remember the smell, sweet, warm, sticky with possibility. Even the failed batches had stories. Even the loaves too hard to chew became part of someone's memory. Or offering. Or compost pile. That's the thing no one tells you about being a baker. Every crumb counts. You think back to your first week here. The blisters. The bad starter. The time you accidentally used temple wine instead of water and made a batch of bread so boozy it got confiscated by a priest who winked as he took it away. You've come a long way since then. Now you shape by feel, not guesswork. You judge temperature by the way the smoke curls from the oven's edge. You know which cracks in the floor creak when the inspector steps on them. You know that a loaf isn't done until it sings as it cools, that some gods prefer triangles, and that sometimes, The only thing separating a blessing from a burnt mess is 5 extra minutes in the fire. And the sand, oh, the sand. You no longer curse it. Much. You've accepted it. Embraced it even. Sand in your shoes, your hair, your soul. Sand in your bread. Because here, in Egypt, the sand is the bread. It shapes the tools, dulls the stones, grits the flour, and preserves the loaves. For centuries in silent hymns. Historians will find your work someday. They'll slice open a rock-hard loaf, sneeze at the dust, and marvel at the grooves of your fingerprints still pressed faintly into the crust. They'll write papers. They'll argue in lecture halls. Some will say your bread was symbolic. Others will say it was sacred. Some poor soul will actually try to eat it. And somewhere in the duat, you'll laugh. Because you'll know the truth. You were just trying to make lunch. A nearby goat bleats into the distance. Himi tosses him across. He ignores it, then headbutts a jar. The breeze shifts, carrying the scent of tomorrow's grain from the silo downwind. You close your eyes, breathing it in. You know that scent. You've earned that scent. Hotep snores. The sky turns deep blue. And as stars blink into view one by one, you realize something odd. You're proud. Not of one loaf. Not even of one day. But of the whole, sandy, smoldering, glorious process. Because you didn't just bake bread. You baked history. You baked identity. You baked Egypt. And you did it all with sand in your teeth and joy in your chest. The fire has long gone out now. The bakery is silent, its walls cooling in the gentle hush of evening. Shadows stretch across the kneading table. Flour settles in slow motion, like dust from another world. You lie on your mat, limbs heavy, breath slow. The scent of baked barley still lingers on your skin, a memory of warmth, of work, of tradition passed hand to hand across the centuries. The city outside grows quiet, too. Even the frogs along the Nile seem to soften their songs. Only the wind remains, brushing gently across the stones, whispering stories from oven to field to Tim. You think of the loaves you made, the cracked ones, the perfect ones, the ones baked only to be burnt. Each one a mar. Each one a whisper. Each one a part of something larger than hunger. Your eyes grow heavier. Your breath eases. The stars above shine bright and cold. But here, under the clay roof of a tiny bakery in a city older than memory, you are warm, grounded, finished. And in the distance, on the altar of some temple, a thin plume of smoke still rises from a loaf shaped like the sun. Sleep now, baker of sand and flame. The gods are fed. And so are you.